After the Central Powers lost at the end of World War I, America entered the 1920s time period. During this time period, there were many corrupt government officials and the American Mafia was shaped. Also during this time period, there was a high radical tension between blacks and whites, which caused an increase in many anti-black organizations and crime committed against the blacks. Furthermore, President Harding and Coolidge had national banks set low interest rates on loans and installment plans were created, which led to an economical crash later on. The 1920s in American history was overall a negative time period.
In the 1920s, President Harding had filled his cabinet with his friends. These friends caused the Teapot Dome scandal, which hurt Harding's presidency. Harding's cabinet members were selling German patents to other countries for huge profit for themselves. Also, one of his members, Fall, head of the Department of Interior, leased land in Wyoming to oil companies, which was supposed to be used for the Navy. After Harding finds out about his backstab, he dies of a heart attack. Soon, Coolidge becomes president, and with his presidency, he lowers interest rate, which will later cause problems due to there too much money in circulation. This will undeniably lead to economical problems in the future because there is too much money in circulation and not enough gold back up the value of the bill. While people were spending money, the most popular investment in the 1920s was the stock markets. During the 1920s, the stock markets were very highly profitable investments due to the increase in earnings and dividends while having lower prices.
In the beginning of the 1920s, there was a great scare in America. The scare was because of communism. Communism, which originated in Russia, was introduced all around the world and was a threat to free enterprise. Due to the scare, Attorney General Alexander Mitchell Palmer directed the Palmer Raids, in which an anti-radical division in the Justice Department overran people's civil rights if they were suspected to be communist, socialist, or anarchist. An example is on July 2, 1920s, a series of raids were issued against many anarchist organizations. Overall, the raids totaled in the confiscation of 4 ordinary pistols and some iron balls claimed to be bombs by the Justice Department. Under the Palmer raids, there was no evidence that turned up or nothing dramatic ever happened due to communism.
Also, due to the scares going on in America, the KKK rose again. KKK, also known as the Ku Klux Klan, is a group of white people that have the advocated extremist viewpoints. For example, white nationalism, anti-immigration, and nativism. In the beginning, the second KKK began in Atlanta, Georgia. The KKK strengthened in the 1920s with over 4.5 million whites because of social tensions increasing between the urban, industrial, and increased immigration. They tried to influence national, state, and local politics, in which they dominated Arkansas, California, Indiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Texas. Criminal behavior by the leaders of KKK also increased in these states.
The crimes were not only caused by KKK members, but also by gang members. During these times, on January 16, 1920, Congress put the National Prohibition Act into effect. Prohibition was the national ban on the sale, production, and transportation of alcohol. This was an unusual sort of bill that used checks and balances to make it into an amendment. Introduced to Congress as a Volstead Act, it passed Congress to go to President Wilson. President Wilson vetoed the bill, but was overridden by more than 2/3 of the states, 36 out of 48 states, accepted the bill. Prohibition became such a popular topic due to World War I, where saving grain efforts were made to supply troops fighting in Europe. Due to Prohibition, many organized crime were happening more often. An example is Al Capone, leader of the Chicago Outfits, who created the most successful gang in Chicago. Overall, the prohibition was a failure due to the lack of details in the act, such as federal penalties for breaking the law was up to the states, and the lack of resources for federal officers to arrest gangs.
During this time period, the number of crimes increased by 24%. Additionally, theft and burglaries increased by 9%, homicide by 12%, assaults and battery rose by 13%, drug addiction by 44%, and police department costs rose by 11.4%. Plus, the average revenue for the criminal underworld was approximately $60 million annually.
Crimes just did not stop there. They continued to occur to blacks moving north during the Great Migration. Most blacks were not welcomed in major northern cities due to high racial tensions between the two groups, and some whites resorted to violence, such as lynching. An example is the Tulsa Race Riot. The riot occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma, also known as the Black Wall Street, being the wealthiest black community in USA. This was caused by a chain reaction of miscommunication and pent-up racial tensions. It was started when Dick Rowland, a black, accidentally went into a restricted area to blacks. There he met Sarah Page, a white woman, and accidentally tripped on her, in which case she screamed. Rowland ran away from the building, and a pedestrian had heard the scream and saw Page in a distraught state and summoned the authorities. Later, Rowland was found on Greenwood Avenue and detained in the top floor of the Tulsa County Courthouse, a more secure location than the Tulsa City Jail, due to a phone call threatening to take his life. Later, newspapers sparked the idea of lynching Rowland, so several hundred whites assembled outside the courthouse making a lynch mob. Seeing the threat, the black community started to arm themselves, and approximately 30 black men, armed, protected Rowland. The whites, seeing that the black have guns, went home and got their own guns. Later, due to the anxiety in Greenwood Avenue increasing, a warning shot was fired by the protector of Rowland, and that started a shooting between the two groups. After some time, the white mob start fires in Greenwood, which destroyed 191 businesses, a junior high school, several churches, and a hospital, amounted to $1.5 million in property losses in real estate, and $750,000 in personal property. In the end, there was no charges filed against the white rioters, and lawsuits against the insurance company for reimbursement were unsuccessful. This was one of the worst riots that occurred in America during the 1920s.
While the blacks were searching for better lives in the North, so were women. Women were looking for better lives in comparison to men. They started to make choices for themselves in marriages, were based on which decreased in U.S. fertility rate from 3.4 to 2.1 children per woman. This is bad because of the continued decrease in fertility rates. Laborers will not easily be available and create problems for the military and markets in the future.
Women were not the only feat that changed during this time. During this time, Americans had created the installment plans, in which a person puts down minimal to no money and over time pays that money back with interest. This, created with the low interest rates, caused millions of dollars in transactions.
To things changing in this time period, the automobile, steel, electrical, and public equipment companies changed dramatically. The industry started creating trust like before Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, which caused the American public problems to pay for goods that are originally cheap to produce but have a big price tag on it.
Also, due to the increase in the demand of educated workers, public schools emerged. At the beginning of the 1920s, 1 million Americans attended high school. In 1926, over 4 million Americans attended high school. To fund the high schools, which was in 1927 approximately $2.7 billion annually, the government increased taxes.
Overall, the 1920s was a negative time period in American history that caused several problems in the future. A problem in this time period was politics and corruption, which blinded the nation from using logic to create good acts. Another problem was that crimes had increased due to either racial tensions or gang-related violence.
Lastly, the lower interest rates caused the American public to have more money in circulation, which will ultimately end in one product, which is an economical downfall. That is why overall the 1920s is a damaging time period in American history.